Welcome to the Sage Verse, with real works and true words. Patterns of recognition leave your brain converged. Time is irrelevant when the thoughts of impediment corrupt your soul with mind-numbing nemesis. The sage's way is where the truth hits the page. Turn your soul into a library in the name of knowledge and discovery. We seek out reality to be gone of human apathy. Welcome to the Sage Verse, where we explore the pressing questions of our age. My name's Jason, and today I'm joined by a good friend of mine and fellow founder of the channel, Hermes. How you doing today, brother?
Very well, thank you, Jason. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. So, it's my topic today.
What are we going to be talking about?
So, the topic we're going to be discussing, it's something I've been thinking about for a while. I think the idea first popped in my mind a couple of years ago, when I was kind of thinking about what is socially constructed, what is naturally formed. And the question that I would like to pose to yourself and to the viewers is power a social construct?
I like that.
Yeah, so before I get your 2 cents on the matter, I suppose I should give a little bit of context and maybe some of my thoughts on this. So there was an idea that popped into my mind when I was just thinking. So essentially it is the concept of power. In my mind, if we are to say that it is a social construct, I'm baffled by this problem, because I think that social constructs can't exist independently of human nature, for they are entirely a derivative of it. Now, with that being said, if power is a derivative of human nature, then my argument is, if we're going to take that point, is that power must first and foremost be something that is derived from nature, and then whatever is manifested within the social landscape is then just a product of that. It's just it's a social construct that is first and foremost dependently derived from nature. However, I think that there is generally a more of a consensus with the fact that all forms of power as we know it are social constructs. Now, I also am very, very divided on this point. I don't know whether it is a natural construct or if it's something that we formed as a society. But that ontological point that there is an antecedent that is nature, in the fact that we as a society, we as human beings, could not exist without nature forming, and nature is independently derived. Hence the fact that, is power something that is independently derived, and then we as human beings are just expressing that form of power? Or just like I suppose the argument for mathematics, is it discovered or is it created by human beings? That's another similar argument. So I suppose, back to you with the question then, is power a social construct, or is it built in to the fabric of nature?
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept. I guess where I would start is defining what power is. And I looked it up, and I kind of found 3 different stances. I'm guessing the second is the direction you're going in, but the 3 definitions I got is the ability or capacity to do something or act in a particular way. So I think that's the self-empowerment, someone's ability to enact their power. The second is the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events. That's power over others. And then thirdly, mechanical or electrical energy, which is just that force of energy in itself, which we usually look at with things like lights and computers and in that direction. If we're gonna, I guess, go into the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others, that power over others, which I guess we formulate as a society, the structure of society with politics and things like that, which, as you've mentioned, it's existed, I guess, for so long now that we don't know if it's a natural occurrence or if it is something society has kind of formulated over time. I often go back to my time in China and that kung fu, yin and yang. I really like that law of duality. So I usually start there when I'm focusing and trying to understand something. So I guess with the yin and yang, if we're looking at nature versus societal direction, I would see it as chaos and order. Because that's yin and yang is often compared to chaos and order. And I've got a quote I looked up. So chaos was the law of nature and order was the dream of man. That's a quote by Henry Adams. And I do believe that chaos is the natural order. If we were to remove all laws or things influencing people's behaviors, I think the immediate reaction to no longer having that foot kind of on your back, stopping you from enacting your natural, beastly, the things that exist within man, the greed, the lust, I think we have certain laws that keep us walking kind of a trail in a way without kind of stepping over it. I think a lot of people have that fear as if the law was removed, people would descend into chaos, people would steal, and there'd be a lot more. I guess it's the breaking of all laws. People have that idea that the authoritarianism that's there preventing or withholding law and order is what is stopping people from descending into chaos. I think if we look at the animal kingdom, there is a lot more chaos that ensues. There's a lot more just murder and destruction within nature. But there is also, even if you look in the animal kingdom, there is a natural kind of leadership and order that is formulated. And I guess if you even look at human society from whichever area or place you want to look at, there has always been a form of leadership. So if you're even going back to the shamans, you would have or people that would live in the jungle and live more aligned with nature. There would still be usually the masculine and feminine roles of leadership. I guess you could look at the movie Avatar, that they kind of structured that very well. You would have the warrior leader, and then you would have the healer or the female shaman, which is more of a spiritual leader. So yeah, the point I'm getting at is I don't think I could think of a point in human history or any kind of group where there wasn't some form of leadership. Do you want to add to that? Kind of getting the gist of what you were looking for?
I mean, you have. You've definitely unraveled a few, or shall I say, you've opened up a few Pandora's boxes there, because when you first mentioned the definitions of power that you looked up, the first one you mentioned, I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then the second one you mentioned, I was like, oh, wait, actually, that one's just as applicable. Oh, wait, the third one as well. So I suppose to that point, the definition of power, let's just approach all of those three, because I think they're entirely relevant. Now, you mentioned the idea of yin and yang and the concept of chaos and order. I don't know what was popping up into my mind or why it was popping up into my mind, but the idea of chaos being the form, the idea of chaos being power, and then the concept of order being what we as human beings in society try to tame chaos or try to make sense of our nature. So whether or not order represents humanity, represents society forming constructs in order to make sense of that natural instinct within us, which is chaos, our ability to create, our ability to manifest, our ability to ascend into innovation and destruction at simultaneous times or at different times, whether or not there is any relevance to that point. It was just something that was popping up into my mind. Now, I don't know if there's any significance to that in any shape or form. It's just an interesting thought. Whether or not order is kind of how society makes sense of power, in the sense that we have all this natural energy within us, which is chaos. Whether it represents the feminine or masculine is entirely irrelevant at this point. It's just this energy.
I think both.
You could say that masculine and feminine is also human beings trying to define that, and therefore making social constructs. We've defined the order as, I think, what is it? It's symbolizing the masculine side, and then nature, Mother Nature, I suppose, symbolizing feminine. But I think that those seem to be some kind of social constructs that humanity may have formed. But I don't think that the definitions are at all relevant in any shape or form. So I'm more interested in finding out how power takes shape and whether or not it is independently derived. Because if it is independently derived, then the concept of something like peace may be out of the realm of possibility within nature, i.e. chaos, i.e. Do you see what I mean? So then order, which is symbolizing society, we as human beings trying to tame ourselves, trying to bring in this self-control, creating laws around our nature. Am I going down the right lines with this? Because this seems pretty interesting.
I mean, if I'm going to go back to that origin of power, I think it's something that all human beings have within them. If I'm going to try and understand it from a spiritual perspective, in Hinduism, they have the idea of the chakras, which are basically spiraling wheels of energy within the body. The third of which being the solar plexus. That's the power origin of the body in the Hindu sense. If you're looking at the word solar plexus, it's, I guess, the original source would be from the sun. And if you're kind of enacting your power, they say it comes from this energy center, the solar plexus. And they even compared to, for example, if you go on a stage in front of a bunch of people and you're, I guess, doing a speech or whatever, sometimes you feel that feeling in your stomach, the butterflies in your stomach. They say that's the solar plexus activating. So if I'm going to try and understand it in that way, or if you look at, I guess, in another sense, more scientific sense, I guess you could say for males is testosterone, for females both testosterone and estrogen. If you're looking in the animal kingdom, where it's a lot less, I guess, intellectual order and more just the power of strength, the animal with the highest testosterone is usually the alpha. If that's with lions, that's with gorillas, the one that's the biggest and the strongest is the one that is usually in charge, and they kind of maintain a certain level of order with their own, I guess, the power they're enacting. So it does exist within the animal kingdom as well. So, I mean, you have to say it is something that is a natural occurrence. I guess with human beings, we're a lot more complicated. I mean, many of our leaders, they don't have that alpha kind of, I guess, look about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I was just thinking of Darwin when he said that the species which is most capable of survival is that which is not the strongest nor the most intelligent, but that which is more susceptible to adaptability. So in that sense, does power take shape or form based on the environment that it's situated in, and therefore if it's able to adapt to circumstance and almost like water, right? Almost like water, blend into the environment and through that survive. Whereas you could say all it takes is to defeat one alpha is another stronger alpha. Whereas those who are able to adapt to circumstance may, find a way to fit in to the environment and ensure their survival that way.
I mean, adaptability is definitely a strength. I have a really good quote I just have to throw in after you mentioned the water, the adaptability. It's by Bruce Lee. He said, if you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. If you put water into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. If you put water into a jug, it becomes the jug. Water can drip and water can crash. Be water, my friends. So he was talking about that adaptability, where water can be something very gentle. It can also be something incredibly powerful. In the last podcast, we spoke about that scholar athlete. So I guess those are your sources of power, and why humanity isn't just the strongest person is the leader. Maybe in ancient times that's how it was, I guess, but in modern times you have two kind of sources of power, and I suppose that's knowledge. They say knowledge is power, and I guess physical power as well. Or that ability to push forward your force in whatever way that may be. So I guess those are the sharpening of your tools, and I guess using them at the right
emotional
time.
Power as well. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, emotional
power.
Yeah, absolutely. That's also a very strong one there. But the adaptability is that, I guess, adapting to your environment and using them at the right times, knowing when to yield, knowing when to use it. That's like the water, the pushing and the pulling, and yeah, if you master that, then yeah, you've mastered power, I suppose.
Yeah, so can we then agree that, well, I don't even know if I agree with this point, that power as it exists, as we've defined it for the sake of this argument, is something that we cannot remove from whether it be nature or society? Is that a realist perspective, in the sense that we have to live with the very harsh fact that power will always take on different forms? Or is the idea of peace maybe a form of power in its own right?
Well,
maybe peace can only exist as a form of power.
I'm gonna, I always believe it's somewhere in the middle. I think when you go to either extreme, I guess the one extreme would be that very high level of power over the people, or authoritarianism, or the other extreme being complete freedom and no leadership whatsoever. I guess that complete libertarianism. If you're going to try and understand the vice of the one side, there's that quote by Lord Acton: power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We've seen it many times where we've had insane authoritarian dictators that get way too much power, also kings, and they, I guess, just abuse their power. It destroys them as a person, and they in turn destroy the people that they're leading. And then on the other sense, like I mentioned at the beginning, without any kind of leadership whatsoever, there's usually chaos that ensues. So I guess where we can see that in modern society is when we want to go against the leaders, often you'll see protests happening, and that's the kind of people essentially taking their power back. But often what happens when that happens, they don't start doing things in a good way. Often what you'll see in protests is things like looting and violence, and like the chaos does tend to ensue.
Just to pop in there before I lose this thought. Is power there destined to socially construct? Because if it is destined to socially construct, what does that say about its existence within the metaphysical? Well, perhaps not the metaphysical, but within that which is nature. If it is destined to socially construct, as we can see in a multitude of different examples, be it governments, institutions, social constructs, if it is destined to socially manifest, then what is the underlying driving factor that allows for that shape, that form?
I suppose, it is a need within society. You have to say it's a need, but again, you have to find that balance with the one side, going too far, too much authoritarianism, too much centralization of power, or one person dictating or controlling larger and larger groups. I think that's where it goes downhill. The people don't think that the leader really hears them or sees them. I suppose leadership is that you're enacting the will of the people. That is what all it is. It's technically an administration role. That's what it should be. It's a person that's technically put there by the people to enact their feelings. So usually I think when you have leadership in smaller groups like community leaders, I think that's when power works in the best way. When you have more kind of centralized power and, one leader over a whole country and millions of people, where there's completely different issues in all different communities and cities, and they don't really have that ability, I believe. Or even if you're going even further, or one person or one group dictating over a whole continent. Or I suppose there's always been theories that there's a desire for a one world government one day. I think that it just wouldn't work. It'd be, again, that power, that level of power, corruption, they wouldn't be enacting the will of the people. It would be that authoritarianism of holding the people down. And to quickly answer that one question you had of will it keep reformulating, there's this very interesting book called Animal Farm by George Orwell, where the animals, they have a very dictatorship style farmer, and then they all plan to kill the farmer, which they do, and then they kind of create their own level of rules. And then what ends up happening is the pigs then, one of the pigs ends up becoming the new leader, as it's the next, I guess, most intelligent animal. And then that pig starts becoming, again, like a dictator, just as the farmer was. And then again, they rebel against the pig. And it is that cycle. You can always, I guess, take away the leader or kill the leader. But then, so again, someone will just take wear Caesar's clothes and just take his place.
Well, that's the realist point in that power. There are swings of power, in that power just doesn't disappear. It takes on different form. It moves from one side to another. It's not something you can just destroy. It's like matter, right? It can't be destroyed. It just becomes transformed.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned an interesting idea about the globalization of power in some centralized form. Are people aware? Are people actually aware of the significance of that? Or, as you said, is it better off? Are we better off to have power divided in different sections of society? So not one institution holding immense power, if power in its final form, whether it's its final form or not is another question, is destined to fall into absolute power and become tyrannical. Because if history is anything to learn from, well, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. But if history is anything to learn from, then we will see power always falling. Empires fall, leaders fall. But we're living in interesting times, obviously. We're living in this, what you could describe as a facade of democracy. Can we call it a true democracy? I mean, how do we know? How do we know if we live in a true democracy? Some could argue that so long as we're paying tax, we are in some sense ruled. But I like to think that the times we're living in now, we definitely have more power regarding our daily interactions and our lives. But whether or not we have anything tangible, any kind of influence that could bring about any change, really, is another question. Whether or not the strings are really pulled behind the scenes. It's an interesting thought.
It is very much so. I think when you're talking power in a leadership sense, it works best when you have the people on your side. Because, as I said, the leaders are usually, in a non-dictatorship environment, put there by the people. The true power exists within the people because, I guess, you have power in numbers. So when the leader is a true reflection of the people, then you have them on your side. It takes me back to when we were kids, and in primary school you usually do this test where you kind of link up the circuit boards and you link it to a light bulb. Did you ever do this when you were in primary school?
I did indeed.
And then the more...
Not that I remembered much of my physics, but go on.
But the more links you put or the more battery power you put, the brighter the bulb would get. So that's the same with the people. When you have more people on your side, you have more of a strength, more of a power, and more of a sway to, accomplish great things within a society, but you can only do that when the people are on your side. If it's a power structure or a leadership where you're using your position to kind of dictate to the people and tell them this is what we're going to do, when it's not really the direction they want to go in, then you won't have that true leadership. It's more leading by fear rather than respect.
Well, I think irrespective of whether it is respect or fear, I think the word there is sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
I think that individuals are massively moved by sentiment, at least when we're talking about the masses, generally speaking. That sentiment is a massive force because it acts like a mob, right? When there is sentiment within society, it's momentum, effectively. And whoever is shaping that momentum, we have to hope and at least pray that that individual has our best interests at heart. Mm-hmm. And they, as you say, are a leader of the people. Because a true leader that has 100% support of the people is, you know, a huge force for good, mm-hmm. so long as what they do and the actions they take are good. We've seen throughout history there are times where leaders are not perhaps in favor of goodness and they perform crimes against humans, nature, whatnot. So it's a difficult thing to really visualize whether or not that individual has good deeds at the forefront of their agenda. Mm-hmm. And I suppose hindsight is the greatest teacher there. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult to really understand. Mm-hmm. But just that point of sentiment being momentum, mm-hmm. I think is an indicator of how power can then become something that's a social force, mm-hmm. but also deeply ingrained within nature, as more humans, as more people back an idea, it gathers more force. And within nature, then you could say that it has a greater effect in shaping humanity, in shaping the future of societies. So mm-hmm. yeah, it's an interesting concept, mm-hmm. but I certainly believe that power is something that will never be removed from society. It will just go from one place to the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And again, if you're looking at ancient times or any, I guess, civilization, really, again, I did mention this before, we have always had certain forms of leadership. If I'm going to compare with the modern day leadership that we have, or the structure in the West of voting in your leaders, I think the reason there is there are so many protests in the modern day, and there is that, I guess, innate desire to, I guess, bring down the power structures, because people don't really believe it is a true reflection of their desires anymore. Especially if you're looking modern day politics, where there's an election campaign and they promise the world to the people, they get them on their side just to get that vote, and then when it comes down to it, they do whatever they want. They have their period of time, and they're not really enacting the true desires of the people. It's a little bit of a broken system. That's how I see it anyway. And yeah, people, I believe, are quite fed up of that system. I don't think they believe it really represents them. I think there's certain power structures that have just been held in power for, I guess, centuries now. And it's kind of you change the face, you change the puppet that's appearing as in power, but behind the scenes, the same things are still being done. The same, the corporations are really running things, and the people behind the corporations, the elites that are not voted in, are still having very heavy, direction on what kind of politics and the direction that takes us in.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that famous quote. I don't know if you've ever read Machiavellian's The Prince. Mm-mm. By any chance. So it's essentially the bedtime literature of most of our politicians, and it's essentially it was the early foundations of political science, but there's a quote that's quite relevant in there, and it's that a person should wear one face in private and another in public. And I think that goes to show with our politicians in that their true colors are not necessarily shown on the outside. What they show to the outside is what can garner them the most support.
Yeah.
But their intentions and their ideas that they hold internally are something that are within the shadows. And perhaps we won't know them because they don't lie in our best interests. So the fact is, if you really, but then to be an honest man or an honest woman in politics is also to leave yourself as a prey to other politicians, because although perhaps the masses may love an honest individual, politicians will eat that individual alive, because it is a game and it's a war between people trying to strive for power. So again, this is the social side. In my opinion, this is the social constructs, the dynamics that exist within people striving for power. That in some sense is intrinsically connected to our natural instincts. So whether, again, returning to the question, is power a social construct? I don't think that we can ever answer the question. I think that we can only form arguments for both sides, and it's something that unfortunately is beyond our comprehension. But not necessarily beyond our comprehension, but beyond any form of conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess when you talk about politics, that is just one system. There have been people that have, I guess, risen to fame and power and had extreme sway over people without, I guess, following that one line of direction. If you look at certain historical figures, Malcolm X, as we've discussed before, Martin Luther King, Gandhi. And if you want to compare, let's take Gandhi, for example. He was quite a person that was interested in progressivism. I guess he's, if you're looking at the political structure, he is left-leaning. But he was all about freedom, libertarianism, and not kind of using your voice to overrule or have that forceful authoritarian rule. He was very much a libertarian, but interested in progression. And his power came from his ability to move people. People followed him. He gained such numbers.
Sentiment.
He overcame the British Empire with literally no violence whatsoever. They would attack them, and he told them, like, don't react to your enemy. That was their power of literally being able to be hit and not retaliating. That made them look bad, because it's many times what you'll see the powerful do when people rise to power, they usually instigate some trouble, and then the natural reaction is to fight back, and then they use that as the excuse. Oh, see, they're violent, they're just looters and violent people.
Well,
so I think the ability to move people is true power. And again, and in our last episode about being an athlete and a scholar, knowledge is power. I guess your physical body is power. So always cultivate your own power, I would say. Cultivate your mind, cultivate your body, and you will have a power within society as well, in your own way, even if it's just in your workplace or with your family, or your power to dictate your own life. There's only so much these leaders really do. They're just, I guess, the face of power on TV, but what do they really do, I guess? What would you say to that?
They don't have any influence to us internally, or they shouldn't in any shape or form, nor do they really, as much as we perhaps think. They obviously have influence on us in terms of our taxes and our obligations as people living in a collected society. We have to pay taxes. I mean, nobody can escape such a thing. But just to bring on a few more examples to the points you were making, in Korea, I know during the ruling times, when you were a son of a king and a king had like 8 sons, the first thing that son would do, who is the firstborn or the crown prince or whatever, the one that's going to become king when his father dies, the first thing he would do would kill off his potential competitors, and they are his fellow brothers. So if you're a brother to a future king, you were a target. You were not it was not a safe position to be the son of a king among many brothers. Although you may have loved each other at that time, when chaos ensues, when power, deconstructs with the father dying, and there is a position to be taken, you will see the eyes of many future lions trying to take that position, and they all think that they have a right to it. But that's those times, right? Perhaps they were more, you could say, realist times, in the sense that they were perpetually aware of the threats around them at all times. Whether or not we've been conditioned to think that, from a realist sense, these threats do not exist, so that the powers that do exist can rule over us willingly behind the scenes, well, it's an interesting idea. But I'm just going to end with that. Do you have any thoughts? Do you want to tackle that, or should we call it a day?
Well, if I'm gonna, I guess, finish, because I went in the political structure, the direction of too much power corrupts. If I'm gonna look in the other end, what I think would happen if the complete power structure was removed. I do think that I usually like to look at the world from a small kind of sample to understand its way, and then apply that to the world. I guess it doesn't always work, but often it does. I guess our initial introduction to power is through our parents, when you're a child growing up, and parents usually have, I guess, one of two ways of doing things. They're either very free, or they're very much authoritarian to their children, or they fall somewhere within the middle. Talk of the idea of being too free, I would say that usually you're going to have a very, a child that acts up a lot, a child that will push their boundaries, or a child that will be very cheeky, not listen to their parents. But also, from my experience, I didn't have, my parents weren't too authoritarian, but, I did start off very rebellious, but I also found my own way, as you said about in the before trialing and making an error and learning from that error. You do that by, your own experience. You only know the fire's hot after you touch it, after you make that mistake yourself. Whereas having very strict parents that kind of set your whole path for you, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do, you never really have that experience of trial and error. And as soon as you take them out of the equation, they get a little bit of freedom, they go to school, that's when they'll start acting up and really, their first introduction to freedom. It's the same in society. If you have very strict leaders and people feel very held down, they're not doing the right thing because it's what their soul's telling them to do. They're doing it because they're scared of, the police or whichever power structure's in place. And often, like we said, if we see protests and things like that, and that power is removed, they're like, finally, like a breath of fresh air, let me go looting, let me be violent, let me just let that inner animal out. So if I believe the power structure was removed completely, I think the initial thing would be chaos. We wouldn't stew into chaos. But again, with that trial and error, I'd like to think...
Well, it's different forms of power striving for that position, which is essentially what I think chaos is, just without any order, just power trying to manifest and take form. That's what I think.
Yeah, so I think that trial and error would happen within natural order as well. If we were allowing natural order, and if we removed these power structures, I think chaos would ensue. But I also think a natural order would be found through that chaos. I think
power taking form. That's what I think. I think that power, in the realist sense, I don't think that we can escape it. I think it will always find a way, because whether it's defined via natural hierarchies or something else, it doesn't matter. Those are all constructs that we can only observe through our limited senses. But we can't deny the virtue of power's existence.
Yeah, absolutely.
In respect to the fact that all these social constructs are products of that. So yeah, that's what I think. But
so there's vices and virtues to be found in too much freedom versus too much power, or too much chaos versus too much order. It's I always, again, bring it back to that balance. I think true, in the sense of leadership, I think true power is when that leader is a true reflection of the will of the people, or I guess the will of the majority of the people. And true power in its own sense is self-empowerment. I think it's important to have self-empowerment and direct your own lives. There's only so much leaders can truly do for you. You are in the main driver's seat of your life and directing your life, and have the best ability to help those around you. So I think self-empowerment is also very important in that aspect.
Yeah, I think that as individuals, we should definitely strive for power over ourselves, and the highest form of that in some sense is self-control. So self-control over one's impulsive decision makings and actions. So yeah. So thank you for the company. That was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that
conversation
a lot. Thanks for the topic. It was a really good one. I guess to answer the question, I'd say yes. I think power is something that exists within nature. Again, we discussed the kind of how it unfolds. Like certain power structures are man-made, but it is definitely a natural occurrence. Yeah,
for me, I think that I can't come to any conclusion at this stage. I think I still need to think about it. I honestly, I think that at the very beginning, I was more leaning towards power being this thing that's ingrained within nature. And then obviously I can't deny the social constructs that are formed because they are almost at the surface of what we can see. But whether or not what that relationship is like, I don't know the full answer. So I'll just leave it as that.
It depends. But yeah, thanks for choosing that topic, Jason. That was really interesting. I enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, I guess we're going to end it there. So thank you to all the viewers. Thank you for watching. Please like the video. Please subscribe. Please share with your friends and family. We are a growing channel, so we really do appreciate the support. And yeah, again, until next time, we'll see you next Sunday. Peace out.
Peace.
Welcome to the Sageverse. Please just observe the birth of this creative surge for the purpose to leave hatred purged and replaced with words that will make you learn to take your place on earth. And once you've taken your place and found your greatest of traits, cultivated the day, this will be making you say, this is the Sage's way.